A shocking admission from Time magazine. Listen to this. The publication writing, quote, a well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. They were not rigging the election. They were fortifying it. Time magazine, by the way. Jordan Sekulow joining us live. He's the executive director at the American Center for Law and Justice. He is also a member of former President Trump's personal legal team and a Newsmax contributor as well. Jordan, thanks so much for coming on this Monday. I want to ask you about this. This Time magazine article drops. It turns a lot of heads, and a lot of folks are questioning the legality. If all of this is true, this shadow campaign that the article talks about, how is a lot of what they're citing legal?
Well, what I see is the opposite. They say they were trying to make it so it didn't appear rigged, and I read this and it appears rigged. And why I say that is that they went and took COVID-19 as kind of a second jumping off point in the article, if you read through the article, to say, okay, this is how we can push through these mail-in ballots, lower the thresholds for voter ID, lower the thresholds for signature requirements, so that we can have a smooth election. Well, how did that turn out for them? It didn't turn out very well, because we ended up with a nation that is still very divided, about to go through a second impeachment, which is disastrous for the country, and about half the country that doesn't believe the elections were held properly, and whether or not it was fraud, whether or not it was just illegal because it was not the state legislatures, but it was judges and executive branch state officials making the rules. This is, again, to me, it makes the election look rigged, not the election look more smooth or look more legitimate, if you will.
You know, you mentioned that term proper, and I want to show you this. Another quote from Time magazine. It says this: every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated. But how do you determine if something is proper while it's still being challenged?
I mean, go back to Bush versus Gore. I mean, hanging chads. I mean, you've got to, if you believe that there is an issue, you litigate it. And we litigated these issues all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court was considering, they ultimately didn't take the case, but they were considering taking a multi-state action because of how the election laws were changed in violation of state rules about how to change the election laws. So we fought those battles all the way. So again, as you pointed out, you don't know that an election is properly held until you go through those challenges. They happen in almost every single election. This one got more attention because it was President Trump. He's more outspoken, and his team, I think, was a little bit more colorful than in the past, maybe. But again, you still have election challenges going on in congressional races right now on the Democrat side, saying that there were election irregularities out of a New York House race.
Yeah, the New York House race is an excellent point. That's still going on as well. A lot of folks don't know that. The other thing it points out, too, which I found interesting, again, from Time magazine, getting folks essentially, and I'm just paraphrasing, but comfortable with the idea of mail-in voting. The other thing was getting poll workers out, in which that was questionable in the first place, of the push for that. Time magazine admitting all this stuff. I encourage you to take a look at this article.
Yeah.
You saw that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that mail-in voting is the norm would be a death nail for many Republicans in many states where it's close, where the elections are close, because of the way it was handled. It was tested in a presidential year in states that had never done it before, and it was a mess. It was not easy. The laws were all over the place in different states, and instead of usually doing these tests in midterm elections, smaller elections, they decided to do it in the biggest elections we've had with the highest turnout ever before in history, and that's where we got to this situation where there were all these legal challenges. You just don't change the rules right in the middle of the game, and we were in the middle of the campaign.
Yeah, Pennsylvania was one of the biggest ones there that things were changed in that state. I want to ask you about this too, because you're not out of the woods as far as Time magazine goes. They took a dig at your legal team. Here's what they said. Yeah. Time magazine says the filings read more like lawsuits designed to send a message rather than achieve a legal outcome. Essentially saying you weren't really working on an outcome for this. You're just trying to send a message here. Jordan, I'd have you answer that.
Yeah, we strategically chose states that would be outcome determinative. So we were totally looking at the outcome. So yeah, there were problems in California, but that wasn't going to be a state that was going to be easy for us to litigate in. So we were looking in states that were outcome determinative that had been the most egregious. So Pennsylvania extending when the mail-in ballots could come in. Georgia doing signature verification. We looked around the country and we said, we looked at Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where the legislatures did not change the rules, but courts did. And that's what we were challenging. And those are legitimate legal challenges. Whether we succeeded or not, it was not to push some narrative. It was to actually challenge whether or not this is the path we're going down, where you can ignore state election law just because you feel like, well, there's a pandemic now and we want to make it easier for people and we're going to do it right before the election. So I take, again, I think this whole article shows that this whole election was kind of put together by this group of different of interest, labor unions and the Chamber of Commerce, which is kind of bizarre to mix those two together, but to put them together so that it would look like a normal election. But in fact, this was the most bizarre election we've had in recent, at least in modern history.
I want to ask you about the former president's legal strategy ahead of tomorrow. I know it's a big day for you and your team. But we are hearing that the legal team will present video evidence of Democrats like Maxine Waters calling for violence against Trump supporters, something in Logan's report earlier. Do you think Democrats are expecting this legal case, and how do you prepare if they are?
Well, so I think this is interesting because they still haven't adopted the resolution on how this trial is going to go yet, Sean. So I expect that probably won't even happen until tomorrow. So we know that the House will start first. They're like the prosecution, and then you'd have the president's team. We had 24 hours each side. The last impeachment trial that lasted 3 weeks and still had no witnesses. But we did have a lot of that video evidence. That is part of the resolution, that they will have to allow that kind of evidence in. And I know the House wants to use it, so I'm sure that, again, the president's team that's handling the impeachment, they want to show Maxine Waters. They want to show Chuck Schumer on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court threatening Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, who, by the way, aren't elected officials. So when you say a whirlwind's coming, you won't know what hit you, what are you talking about when you're talking about a lifetime appointed federal officer to the U.S. Supreme Court who's not up for election? You can't make that excuse like, oh, it was just a political comment. We're gonna go after them hard in the election cycle. So yeah, I expect you're gonna see a lot of these videos. You're gonna see a parade of horribles from the House. But what I'm most interested in is the rules of the game, which have not yet been set for this impeachment trial.
So if the rules of the game say that they're going to bring in witnesses, what does that do for your strategy? Are you prepared to bring in witnesses on your defense?
So I think what will probably happen, because we're hearing that most Democrats and Republicans don't want this to go on for more than a week. It looks like it'll probably go into next week, just because we're starting on a Tuesday. It looks like because they're going to honor David Schoen's request to observe the Sabbath. They won't be in Friday evening or Saturday until sundown. So unless they make a special rule, they don't usually go into session Sunday. So it'll at least bleed over into next week. You allow witnesses, which is usually a separate vote. That's how we did it. We had a separate vote after we all presented all of our arguments and we got to show all of our videos. We then had a separate vote the Senate took about witnesses, and ultimately they decided not to have any witnesses. So I think that's one way this could be set up, is that we won't know tomorrow if there's going to be witnesses, because that will be a vote that occurs after both parties, the House managers and President Trump's attorneys handling the impeachment trial, are able to present their case and answer the questions from the senators, which we still don't know if it's going to be done the usual way, which is by paper, so that the senators don't actually speak. They actually write them out on a card.
All right. We'll wait to see that. I appreciate you taking a few minutes with me today on this Monday, Jordan. I don't know if you were up late watching the Super Bowl, but if you did have to get up early with me, thank you very much. Good to see you, Jordan Sekulow.
Good to see you, Sean.